tonight we're really lucky to have two very special panel discussions on resistance and its multitudes. We have a first panel about political and cultural resistance, and the second one will be about environmental and grassroots resistance. And so for that, we're joined by very special guests, activists, academics, policymakers, community leaders. And so without further ado, I will pass on the mic to my friend and Uyghur ally, Alerk, who will be moderating this event. Thank you all so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alerk Ablikim. I used to be one of the representatives of the Uyghur community in the Netherlands, and now I'm a political consultant for an Uyghur organization as well as the International Campaign for Tibet. And I'm today moderating this panel discussion. The idea of today is that we'll have a discussion on resistance, and the first topic will be on political and cultural resistance with our amazing panelists. Maybe let's start with Hera. I want to start off with an introductory question, and then you can explain more about yourself. What element of your work constitutes, in your eyes, as resistance?
Thank you, Alerk. I think as a city councillor in The Hague for the Green Progressive Party, as a woman, as a colored person, as a Muslim, someone from Schilderswijk, which is considered a socio-economical, not super good neighborhood, but I grew up there. I think a lot of the things that I say already can cause some movement. Whereas when I say something, for example, about a ban on fireworks, when I say it, it's a huge thing and the news picks it up, or I get threats even on that topic. But when my colleague, being a different outer body, says the same, nothing really happens. So you can really see, even in The Hague, it matters who says something. So in my view, anything that I say and I speak up on behalf of the environment, on behalf of minorities, on behalf of what Alerk and I did for the Uyghur community in The Hague, it gets attention. But I think that's also my passion, to say stuff, certainly in the politics in The Hague, that maybe cause some discussion, can cause some hate towards me, but I think it's super important that I take this job serious and keep doing it, even though sometimes it's tough and it can hurt you with threats and hopefully not worse, but it happens even in The Hague.
Thank you so much. Same question to you, Gulnaz.
It works, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I will just a little bit follow up maybe on what you said, Hera. I think indeed very much the way who we are influences what we stand for and how we are perceived by the others. So I think indeed being as someone from Russia in today's world, in the Netherlands, it means first of all indeed resisting some of the oppression that in this case Russian government places on us. And given my job as a university teacher, as a researcher, this means also just keep doing research on topics that the Russian government actually doesn't want to be discussed. At the same time, as someone coming from minority background in Russia, this is also, I think, a task for me to keep saying that when we say Russia, it doesn't only mean Russians, but there are also a lot of minorities who live there and who do not necessarily share the same ideas as the government tries to project on the outside world as the united population. So I think in this regard, indeed, for me, it's also one of the things that I'm personally quite passionate about, indeed, to keep the representation and keep the voice of minorities from Russia also being heard.
Thank you so much, Gulnaz. Casper?
I think I try to use my, minor platform at the university to introduce my students to a whole range of diverse points of view. So I think a problem, for example, with Chinese studies in the West, which is something I studied as an undergraduate in the past, was that it very much takes a Han Chinese-centric perspective, which to a certain extent maybe is understandable. But I think especially when we talk about Chinese politics and have discussions about the policies of the Chinese Communist Party with young people who in the West who don't know much about it yet, it's very important to highlight voices from Uyghur and Tibetan communities. So one way that I've been trying to do that is basically by inviting a lot of guest speakers. So Alerk basically needs to turn up at least once a semester in my courses. Last year I had Wangpo, the director of the International Campaign for Tibet, give a lecture to my students and so on and so forth. And this is not just when it comes to China, I think, but I've even had Jana coincidentally as well, speaking about Ukraine. So to a certain extent, I think I just try to introduce my students to as many diverse voices as I can.
Please, Jana.
War is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And the most important for Ukrainians now, and I think for you too, it is to continue and push even if the whole world resists, and even if the whole world limits you, if even your friends who were your friends turn to be traitors and trying to sell you out, you shouldn't give up. And you should just, continue further because you know what you are fighting for, you know why you are standing. And this power to continue, it's not something given. You are trying to continue every single day, push yourself that I cannot give up today because there are people that rely on you being strong here. So I think that is the biggest, gift. And it's the most honorable if you can continue pushing and if you can continue fighting for your values. And it's something that Ukrainians are doing every single day. And even without support, even with lots of limitations, we continue.
So what I hear is that it's important to listen to the voices that are undercovered, to give an opportunity for minorities, for women, unfortunately, for Ukrainians in this society who are facing a lot of difficulties these days, which is an understatement. And I wanted to ask, of course, it's very awe-inspiring to have this duty. How do you engage if you want to resist? How do you engage in this act of resistance as an effective strategy? Maybe, Casper, you can give first an academic overview, or in your own case, in the sinology world, how to resist effectively.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought I was going to be the last one to be asked this compared to the people on this stage. But because maybe I have a more distant view and the privilege as a, you understand why I am privileged somehow. For me it's more about, first of all, listening to those voices yourself. And also recognizing patterns when people around me don't listen to those voices. So as I gave the example earlier, if we speak about China, that the voices of Tibetans and Uyghurs are not forgotten, but similar if we speak about geopolitics in Europe, that sometimes people take too much or have too much patience with the Russian point of view, for example, which happens on the far left and far right quite a bit, and we should centralize Ukrainian voices. That's basically what I try to do myself, but also correct others when they do not do it.
And maybe a question to Gulnaz then. How do you do it if everything seems hopeless then? How do you resist in that situation?
Yeah, I think when you asked the question, I had to think about the first month after February 2022, when indeed the situation seemed it couldn't get worse, because Russia just started a large-scale invasion, and we saw all the images. And for someone being from that country, it's also very, of course, difficult process to come to terms to the idea that your country just invaded another country in a very brutal way. And I think indeed when you talk about how to resist and what works, I think the most powerful thing that I experience is in this month, and I'm to some extent in a very weird way maybe thankful for that, is the experience of community. Because I think we're all busy with our careers, with our own, trying to find a way in this world, and then all of a sudden you get united with people whom you thought you would never be together, because all of a sudden there is a shared tragedy, there is a shared cause. And I think this is also part resistance to authoritarian regimes that try to make us be separated. I mean, in the case of Russia, this will be indeed persecution, the labeling of all opposition members as foreign agents, and then thereby they also try to sow discord that, you know, because you fear yourself being under pressure, you try to distance yourself from the people who are already on the list. But that didn't work. And I think that was very powerful to see, that despite the fear, despite the risks, people nevertheless try to find each other and try to bring forces to actually, indeed, I think as Jana said, it's a long battle, and you need each other.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Hera, do you feel sense of community here? I mean, you represent the city, you represent minorities, you represent people who look up to you. What community do you feel comfort in, or you feel associated with? What is valuable to you?
Good question. Good question. Well, I also think there is not one community, I think, where I associate myself with. In a broader sense, I think if you are standing for something and are perhaps suppressed in one way or the other, which can be minor but can also be huge, I think find some allies. That can be many groups, many communities with the same challenges, which I also, for example, see in The Hague on the city council level when it comes to discrimination of Muslims or women with a hijab, with a headscarf. But I also see it with people who have a handicap and they cannot travel everywhere with public transport. I see it with the Uyghur movement, of course, as well. I see it with my own background, having a Kashmiri background from Pakistan. I see it with their movement. And I try to, in The Hague, in my work as city councillor, to be an ally for all those groups or communities that have, in a way, the same challenge for speaking up for their rights, for their right to exist, and finding each other. And I think that's also what I try to do, to make, you could say, maybe some kind of puzzle with all the different pieces and being more one instead of only fighting your own battle. I think a lot of us have the same battle, and I think joining together makes us much stronger as well.
Yeah. Yeah, stronger and also maybe part of that larger community, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, of course, Jana, in the act of resistance, of course, you exemplify that in many ways. I know how hard, I can imagine how hard these past weeks must have been, past years. How do you keep yourself motivated? And how do you give space for that sense of duty? And does that translate within your community as well, Ukraine community? Or is that broader? Do you feel a sense of community within Europe, within the Netherlands?
Good question. I think, speaking about myself, yes, I can say that for me it is hard to forget, to lose motivation, to forget about my duty, that like no one put this duty on me. Like I did it myself, and no one makes me to do anything, and I'm not getting paid. I'm doing everything because I know that it's right, although that it hurts me a lot. You know, I'm unemployable in this country, and like it's fine for now. But because I saw victims of Russia, and I saw dead bodies of people, and I saw war crimes, I know that if I survived, I have the duty to share the story of those that are not able to share their story, and those people that either they are killed already, or they experience such level of violence that it will silence them forever. And so others should speak for them. And so for me, it's often, that's my motivation, to speak for others that are not able to speak anymore, or they will never speak up. So that is my motivation, and it's justice. Like, I call it from Bucha to the Hague. From Bucha, where it's one of the first cities that was liberated, and lots of war crimes happened there, and the whole world saw pictures from that city. And the Hague is a city for justice. So my motivation is that all war criminals have this journey from Bucha to the Hague. That's something that doesn't let me sleep at night. At the same time, I cannot say that all Ukrainians or all people around, they are actively involved. So often I see this lack of commitment, or that people are not ready to give away something and they choose themselves, and which is all right, but I still judge it, because I'm choosing differently, so I don't understand it, but it's all right for others. But it is hard.
Yeah. It's hard to see. I presume it's hard to see other people not sacrifice when you sacrifice so much. Yeah.
I'm learning not to judge.
Yeah.
I'm learning. It's important that you are responsible for your decisions. You are responsible for your life decisions, and it's a package deal. You make a decision. You think that it's right, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm accepting my life decisions, and I'm not responsible for others' life decisions. And then in the future, people will ask, okay, there was the largest war in Europe since World War II. What were you doing? What was happening? How did you help? And believe me, these questions will be asked. Because now I feel that we are in 1938. And when we gave, that is like Munich Agreement that was signed in September 1938, and part of Czechoslovakia was given away to Hitler. 6 months later, Nazi Germany took over the whole Czechoslovakia. So it feels now, for me as for Ukrainian, it feels the same.
Maybe, thank you so much, Jana. I have this great fortune as a moderator to have great academics amongst us who can give us the historical overview and developments, and maybe because these are, of course, Tibet Days, from Bucha to The Hague, could also be from Beijing to The Hague, or from Moscow to The Hague as criminals. And in a way, this discussion resistance, of course, we see different elements of resistance, but I actually want to draw this in a way to Tibet, because Tibetans have been promised sovereignty as well, have been lied to by the international community, and have been, in a sense, betrayed in the past. And we are living in times where we have to engage with that here, living in the West as well. But they keep resisting, and I want to maybe look at other ways or places or historical moments where these instances of resistance have been successful. So maybe I wanted to ask Casper on if he can give a brief overview of places where people resisted for democracy, for freedom, against dictatorship.
Yeah, I think examples I very much like to introduce in my classes, also because it's just not very known in the West. Is, for example, that South Korea was a right-wing dictatorship, military dictatorship until the late 80s. And it really took decades of activism, often by students, but also by a lot of working class people, in order to overthrow this dictatorship in the late 80s. And once again, also, unsurprisingly, I think a very central role for women in that movement. And similar stories also when it comes to Taiwan, which became a democracy in a little bit more gradual way, but where people also at some point took to the streets, etc. And it's important to note when that happened, because this was in the late 80s. Of course, when in China also, of course, we had the Tiananmen Uprising, followed by Tiananmen Massacre, but we also had the Tibetan Uprising, of course. And yeah, it's like the choices of particular dictatorial rulers to use violence at crucial moments or to shrink back from it, basically, like determined the course of history, it seems. And especially among Westerners who know very little about Asia, they often have prejudices that Asians aren't really the protesting kind. The Asians value hierarchy more than we do, and so on and so forth. Well, I think it's especially important to draw people's attention, to the history of the South Korean democracy movement, the history of the Tibetan uprisings, in fact, taking place over several decades, in order to dispel them of such prejudiced and racist notions.
Thank you so much. And maybe Gulnaz, you talked about minority groupings, right? I know maybe from my own discussions with Gulnaz, an important element for her is agency. Can you maybe elaborate on to what extent, for example, minorities need to have agency? Do you have to use that word? Is that something that in your work you see a lot as well? The voices that are that need to be heard as a statement of resistance?
Sure, and I think I will connect a little bit also not only to minority ethnic identity, because especially if we talk about countries like Russia,
yep.
Ethnic minority identity is usually very neatly and tightly intertwined with many other identities, be it religious identity, because you have Muslims who are minority, and then they also ethnically different, but also class, regional disparities, and gender. So I think in this regard, indeed, what we do see, for instance, now, of diaspora communities who represent different minorities, with Burats, people from Tuva, people from Tatarstan, people from Chechnya or Dagestan here in Europe, is that you do see young generation coming up, and it's indeed very powerful, because they take also different forms of protest. So if before the main calls will be indeed about political representation and political sovereignty, which is of course very important for a lot of minorities in Russia. Younger generation also speaks a lot about racism, a lot about hidden forms of discrimination and exclusion. And there I think indeed women play a very important role. And to some extent you would say it's a pity that, we still distinguish the gender and, there is still some disparities. But I think it's also culturally still the case. I mean, Eastern Europe was Russia indeed promoting traditional values and traditional gender roles. It's also not a surprise that these differences still very much exist. But I also think there are social reasons for women who can escape the country because they're not in the military service. They can be indeed the people who can speak up. So I think in this regard, it is indeed very important to sort of keep focusing on indeed both on ethnic minority identities and agency as ethnic minority, but also indeed as a sort of this circling the conversation about indeed solidarities, that especially with the younger generation you do see solidarities with racial struggles, be it in the US, be it even here in the Netherlands. So in this regard it's also, in my regard, very fruitful development that especially with the young generation, and digital media of course plays a role, that there are broader coalitions emerging. So it's not only Tatars speaking to Burats, but also Tatars speaking to people from Africa who live in Europe. So in this regard, it's there is hope for broader solidarities.
Interesting. We are almost going to the next panel, but I think it's important to have an opportunity to have questions. I think about 2, but before we get to questions, I need someone who will help me go around the room and ask questions. There should this, but before then we get to the questions, maybe one more question to Hera. Do you see the coalitions of solidarity something in your work here as well? Because we have a very diverse city, and how does that play out in your day-to-day work?
A coalition, you mean?
Yeah, as in solidarity coalitions, not maybe
I wish.
your own coalition.
I wish. I hope we will have it. I think in the Netherlands, in the political environment, and also in The Hague, in the politics that I see for 3 years now, I think we don't have that much solidarity or coalition in solidarity. I think people are getting afraid to speak up even. Politicians are getting afraid more and more because of threats. I think we should have a coalition. I think we try it on our own, I call it islands, the island of the green progressive, the islands of the liberal, the island of every kind of different group, but a coalition, I think we don't really have that. I hope we will, because I think speaking up, especially in these times, with all kind of suppression in The Hague, in the Netherlands, around the world, we really need to have those coalitions. I don't think we really have it in The Hague. It's really missing. People are normalizing what we cannot normalize. People are normalizing suppression, be it in the Netherlands, be it anywhere else in the world. And I think that's dangerous. Normalizing what is wrong, that's dangerous.
Fantastic call. Questions? First come, first serve. Yes, yeah. No questions? Wow, it was that clear. Oh, there. Okay, question.
I saw here, I think.
Hi. Thank you so much to all of you. Jana, I was really inspired by what you said about people, there being a difference between people who stand up and people who don't. And I was wondering, like, what do you think causes the difference, and is there hope or a way to fix that, do you think?
If there is a hope, to be honest, I don't know at this point. One thing that like distresses me recently a lot, that I cannot really miss now, and something that takes away my hope, is that how is it possible that some basics are questioned, you know, because yesterday I made a post where I literally needed to say that Ukraine is not an aggressor. How is it possible 3 years later that me, like I as a Ukrainian, I need to tell I'm not an aggressor, but I'm treated like one? 3 years later, after 140,000 alleged war crimes committed by Russian forces. So it is something that takes away my hope. And after 2.5 years of active advocacy, online, offline, just posts, drones, everything, not the lack of awareness. It's not the lack of awareness. People know what's happening. But it's something that doesn't make them being active. And I don't have an answer to that as of today. But it's not the lack of awareness. People know what's happening, and people know. But as soon as it doesn't touch them personally, I'm sorry, but I believe that only missiles above The Hague will make people understand what's happening. I don't want to scare anyone, but even like my friends that are, like, you know, on the left spectrum in the US. Yesterday, like 3 days ago, he texted to me, Jana, what's your donate link? We will fundraise money, because they see that there are democracy under threat in the US. At this point, for last 15 months, he never asked me anything, how he can support Ukraine. Never. Only 3 days ago. So, with all my belief, but I think when it touches you personally, but it's too late. Like, you know, it cannot be like that. I don't have an answer to that.
Hera, please.
Yeah, I understand what Jana is saying. I was wondering, do you think too many people know it? Definitely, but too many people also just don't care because it doesn't harm them directly. How can you do something about that? That realization that it actually does.
I thought about speaking up through their values, like every time that I try to do something, I think, okay, what this particular person cares about, you know, and talk through their values. It's like that I came to that point by practice, not by studying or like, you know, media, communication, social sciences. But it is hard, like, you know, to speak through their values with their voice.
Yeah.
Got someone who really wants to. Yep.
Well, just very shortly, on a big global level, we can't do too much. But just to give you one example of hope, a drop in the ocean, I've had 6 Ukrainian people living in my house since the beginning of the war. And that's not to say, oh, I'm so good, but it's just like, I hear the stories every day from them, and the husband is coming now since Trump denied help. He's a drone expert, so there's something cooking in the Dutch government with drones and help from Holland, I'm sure. So it's just an example of let's not give up hope.
Hi, my question is for all the guest speakers who would like to answer this question. Because when we talk about resistance, which means there is oppressor and also perpetrators, and there are also a group of people who are accomplices. Those people who are accomplices, they might do it due to their ignorance, or they might really have other intention, bad intentions. So when you are in resistance, you have to deal with those oppressors and the perpetrators. How do you deal with that emotionally? Are you angry with them? Are you desperate with the human beings? I find that's a question I'm very curious about.
It's a roller coaster. I'm on everything.
It's a very good question. Anyone who wants to take a swing at it? Yes? Yeah, please. From a political perspective, yes?
I can try it from a political perspective. In The Hague, where the tendency is super right-winged and extreme right-winged, I would say, it's hard. Sometimes I really, even in debates, can get emotional. When it, for example, comes to having certain problems in the Netherlands, that not everyone can find a house very quickly, which is, of course, a problem. People who cannot buy their groceries anymore, not everything they need. People have children going hungry to school. But when the emotion becomes of an oppressor and kind of populism, saying that it's all to blame to the refugees or the people coming here because they are suppressed in other countries and that they are the reason why we cannot find a house or our children go hungry to school, that's dangerous and super hurtful. That's a tendency in The Hague as well. And sometimes I get angry, but I still know as a political representative in the Netherlands, I also cannot only get angry. I need to do something. I need to cause some kind of movement and try to make them see that what they are saying and the hate that they are spreading doesn't help us in the long run. But it's a tough call. It's a tough call. I think at the moment we are kind of losing in the Netherlands in a political scene at the moment. It's tough.
Maybe on that, it seems like there's a difference between the system that's to blame and then specific people, institutions. But those, like the second element, is easier in that way because you know what to attack. But once you see or at least think the system is the problem, how do you deal with that broader question? If you have anything to, maybe you're a politician, you have to accept the system. Maybe you should call for a revolution or something.
I think that call is not even a super bad idea because I don't know. I really don't know. We try to talk and try to do it in a sophisticated manner, but you can see, at least in the Netherlands, and I think even in Germany now, in the US, that the sophisticated slow manner is losing, and the more loud and clear voice, in a way you could say, even though it's not true and it's false, is winning. So we do need activism, I think, more. And at the moment in the Netherlands, being an activist or speaking up about something which is not popular, they think you are the problem and you should shut up, basically. And that's a dangerous movement because people will get afraid to speak up. And so I don't have the solution. I'm trying. It's not really helping at the moment that much.
Maybe we should be louder then.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think I will bring up a little bit of a sort of complicated picture, because
Sure.
one thing is when indeed you are on the good side of the story, and the other thing is when you're actually on the bad guy side, because it will be very easy to say, as all minorities within Russia have been always opposing Moscow, because we do see it also as the center that has been oppressing, the peripheries and non-Russians, and to say that, it's not our war and we have nothing to do with it will be an easy way out, but it's not the case, because indeed we have been citizens of this country, and I think the whole idea indeed about collective guilt and to what extent all of us in different ways, so again, not to put everyone into the same basket, sort of have contributed to the situation where we are. It's a difficult one, especially when even within your family there are different views. And then, of course, you get angry on the first, especially in the first month, where you talk to your parents and they seem to see the whole picture on a very different way, and that just causes a lot of anger and disagreement. And the first call will be just like stop talking, because convincing the other doesn't really work because everyone is on emotions. However, it's your family, so you kind of just like walk away. And I think indeed what has been indeed responding to the question, I think emotions are good in terms of because they do mobilize us and they do make us act. So in this regard, I think just sidelining emotions is not the way that we should go about it. At the same time, I think indeed, speaking of, again, sort of me turning back to the idea of, allies and coalitions, you have to also talk to people with whom you disagree. And even if it's not necessarily to immediately convince them, because it's not an easy task when you're fighting against the propaganda machine, just getting millions and millions dollars pumped into it, and rubles in this case. It's not an easy task, but nevertheless also sort of to try to understand the logic behind, and also try to understand how the other side thinks and what kind of arguments do they have, and that sort of also helps you to consequently also to maybe to improve your strategies, to come up with the narratives that can be convincing. But I think also again, into 3 years, and of course the war has been going on already for more than 10 years, but I think for me it's personally indeed the last 3 years, I think the danger is also not to whitewash, because I think sort of we do say, these are people from poor regions who have been drafted, they have really nothing to do with the regime, they're not supporting it. I don't think it's true. In terms of, it's also not that easy just to take away any responsibility. So I think sort of you can have sympathy and try to understand what's driving these people, but I think having still a responsibility for acts on all of us, I think is important. And this regard, again, this is a work that, in this case, Russian society as a whole, regardless of ethnic background, will have to do in the coming decades.
Wow, yeah. We all bear responsibility in ways for the system or anything beyond it. Unfortunately, we are nearing the end of this panel, but I want to give the final two panelists something to say. I want to ask Casper first on, maybe also on the reflection on what Gulnaz and Hera has said, on objectivity, on listening to the other side, maybe listening to others you disagree with, maybe you see that in your work as well, and any other final remarks you may have.
I'll keep it very brief, but I don't think I can ever understand, for example, what the Tibetans must feel towards the Chinese or the Chinese government. But I do think, if I remember the direct quote, but the Dalai Lama has said we should hate not the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. And I sometimes try to, because I have students also from all over the world in my class, including Chinese. In fact, one of them is here tonight. But I say also, if we look at the Tibetan Uprising, for example, or the Tiananmen Massacre in 1989, the Chinese government had to take a battalion of soldiers to carry out the massacre from like a really rural area from like the most backward, sort of lowly educated people, because they were afraid if it was anyone who was in any way closer to the people in Beijing or just a little bit more educated, they would refuse to carry out the massacre. Another small sign of hope is, for example, in the police files that were leaked from, about the Uyghurs, so like about how the Uyghur policy was actually not the police files. These were the government files. But the Uyghur policy, like one of the things that really struck me was that the major roadblocks in the beginning, when they were beginning to carry out the increased oppression of the Uyghurs, was that a lot of local Communist Party officials, Han Chinese officials, didn't go along with it. They had to be replaced in order to carry out sort of the most radical policies. And these are small bits of hope. And then really lastly is, I think, becoming more compassionate is also about looking more critically at yourself. And I sometimes catch myself that I always have very large, very big opinions about Russia and China, etc. But I think also for the Dutch among us, it's very important to connect discussions about Russian colonialism and Chinese colonialism to the past in the Netherlands. And that's why I'm very happy that in the next panel, there'll be my friend Raki Op from West Papua campaign, who has, through conversations with him, I've learned things about Dutch colonialism and its legacy that even I had no idea of, even though I'm supposed to be a specialist of that region. Imagine how embarrassing that is.
Thank you for introducing Raki already. Thank you so much. Casper, Liana?
Hard to find the right words. But it's just that I want you to have power and confidence that you will win. And I'm speaking as a Ukrainian, and during last 200 years, 300 years, Ukraine was under, like at some point in 1920s, Ukraine was occupied by 4 countries. And we were not supposed to be as a country now, maybe, as an independent. And because we are independent, it is because of uprisings, resistance, cultural resistance. It's first of all of Ukrainians 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And when it was even an impossible situation, like, you are occupied by 4 countries. But today, we are an independent, sovereign country, and we are kicking, we are fighting, we are standing strong, and we are not going to give up. And everything can change. And something that is artificial, it will fall. But if you have cultural identity, if you have values, that's something that no one can take from you. And it's, lies as a rock, and many things can change, but that doesn't change, and that will make you free.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take a louder.